While we're waiting, for those of you who have been to a few of these, you know the drill. Let's fire up the waterfall in the chat. Where is everybody coming in from today? And I'll start it live. I'm in Vancouver. I was in Santa Fe last week, back in Vancouver this week, and enjoying the oxygen and the moisture of Vancouver over Santa Fe. But I miss Santa Fe. We got some Austin. We've got more Santa Fe. We've got Baltimore, Tokyo, Madison, Wisconsin. Do we have any Europes? Oh, Vancouver. Oh, that's my wife. She's in here. All right. Richmond. Where's our European contingent? Montreal, more Canadians, New York. Ooh, some more Vancouver in the house. All right. West Palm, Florida. Fantastic. Welcome, everybody. All right. So this is a live session I've been looking forward to because it is a topic that I love, and health and longevity and the physiological side. I mean, MEA, when I started working with MEA, we had done really well in the social, psychological side of aging, right? But there's this other side to it as well, which is the physiological side of aging. And it's a place that MEA is expanding into. And uh, and the reality is if we want to live long, happy lives, we need to have both the psychological and the physiological sides of aging nailed. And that's kind of what we're working on here today. And so today's guests are a husband and wife visionaries, well, actually behind the Wanderlust festivals that united yoga, music, a mindful community, and also Commune, which is an online platform for health and personal growth. And they also run the Commune podcast. It reaches millions of listeners and really dive into different practices that support health, connection, purpose. And, it's an incredible podcast. They've had, big thinkers in the longevity space. And Jeff recently wrote a book as well, The Good Stress, about strategies that help reverse diabetes and lost 60 pounds at the age of 50. Schuyler founded the Kula Yoga Project in New York just after 9/11, developed her own yoga styles, taught worldwide. So I've got two amazing guests here, Schuyler Grant and Jeff Krasno. Welcome.
Thank you, Derek.
All
Really
right.
good
Great
to
to
be
be with
here.
you.
Man, where do we start? I have so many questions. Um, for the people who don't know you yet, how do you guys describe the work that you do? Let's start there.
I call it the 1-2 punch. Um, I uh I I break people down in the yoga
Mhm.
studio and Jeff builds them back up with information and story. No, I would say let me rephrase that. Um, I would say that the thing that actually undergirds what both of us do is community building.
Mm,
We both have been really motivated by bringing people together.
mhm,
Me first, primarily through yoga. I started my first studio 25 years ago, and Jeff was deep in the music industry at that
mhm,
point, bringing people together through music. And then we've obviously navigated through different businesses, Wanderlust, which is a huge community enterprise, of course, and then Commune, which is its own community endeavor.
mm,
So, it's interesting because both of us work a lot one-on-one or like in smaller groups and in a
mhm,
yoga studio or with Jeff, like the individual reading his book or listening to his podcast. But
mhm.
ultimately, I would say the larger mission is really in bringing people together.
Interesting. So community and wellness, how do those go together? What, because I mean, most of the wellness, like let's go into the biohacker world. They're not talking about community.
Mhm. Yeah, I
Those
think
are
the
men.
signature of biohacking, yeah,
It's true.
primarily that is true. Primarily, yeah, the signature escape velocity and can I live forever? And
Yeah.
that appears often as a very individual pursuit. I will just say that, you know, I've felt that community and well-being have been yoked from the very, very beginning. As
Hmm.
Skylar mentioned, I'm a refugee of the music industry, not the healthiest industry, but certainly one that sits atop of community.
Hmm.
Um, in many ways. And you mentioned this, but right in the alpenglow of 9/11, Schuyler had the kooky, crazy vision to open a yoga studio at Ground Zero, which was literally above my office. And
Hmm.
that was really my first opportunity to have a front row seat to the power of somatic and spiritual practice combined with community and that elixir um, and its ability to heal.
Hmm.
So, the denizens of Lower Manhattan would flock up these funky, cockeyed lime green stairs into this very humble little studio that Schuyler started called Kula Yoga Project. This was before there was a Tony Equinox on every corner, right? So this was
Hmm.
before the efflorescence of yoga studios. If I think the bathroom was actually in the studio, so yeah, and it was about the width
Very
of a bread.
convenient.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was about the width of a bread box. So you
Mm.
always knew when someone had to go. But I would walk up there from my office into the little vestibule outside of that one room studio and watch people come out, drenched in sweat, hearts open, minds open,
Hmm.
collapse on a funky little futon, and just share their stories and laugh and cry, but really heal. And that
Hmm.
was incredibly influential and really bent the arc of both my personal and professional life. And that was really the seed of Wanderlust.
Hmm. So what is Kula Yoga? So this is what you've created, or this is what you developed, Skylar. Tell us about that.
Well, like Jeff said, it really primarily was a project to bring people together. I was a film editor at the time, and then
Hmm.
also a yoga teacher, but just kind of on the side, and never really intended to open a yoga studio. And then there was that amazing bittersweet moment after in 9/11. I don't know if anybody here, a New Yorker at that time. It was like, really people just asked not what their city could do for them, but what they could do for their city.
Mm.
And I was like, I don't know, what can I do? I'll open a yoga studio, I guess. So we just sort of really cobbled it together. And I was just going to do it as a side project. And then it quickly became clear that you don't run even a very small business on the side.
No.
So it was either let it go or stop editing films. And I there's it was it, it's a really powerful thing to be a part of a process.
Mm.
So yeah, so I guess first and foremost, it really was more about bringing people together than it was about doing yoga. The yoga was the excuse, it was the way in. And
Hmm.
then, of course, the yoga has its own magic,
Hmm.
and it connects people to themselves and then together, which is really just one of the most incredible elixirs, is, to be more connected inside and outside at the same time is just,
Mm.
fantastic. So, I eventually, over time, developed my own teaching style, and then that sort of led to teaching teachers and leading retreats and trainings around the country and around the world. But again, that wasn't the plan. It was just it was just how life unfolded, which is one of the great things about being older, being in midlife,
Mm.
is looking back on those inflection points that really, that could have gone left or could have gone right, and then
Hmm.
unfolded in the way that they have and seem perfect in all of their imperfections.
Hmm. Yeah.
But I would definitely say that's been the story of Kula. It's really been just an enterprise of holding space for people. It's never been a particularly great business, to be honest. But we're
Yeah.
still open 25 years later, and that's not a small
Wow.
feat in
No.
the yoga space.
No, that's a big feat in the yoga space for sure. Good for you. So Jeff, let's talk about your book, Good Stress. So you reversed diabetes and lost 60 pounds at age 50. Um, let's start there. Tell us about that journey.
Yeah, I mean it's not really that extraordinary. Sadly, it's very ordinary, and I think a lot of
Hmm.
people can relate to this. You know, in my through my 40s, I was overworked and then had all of the most anodyne, prosaic symptoms of modern life, just like brain fog and chronic fatigue. I
Hmm.
was a total insomniac. And then, of course, I had all the physical presentations of mid-age. So, you know, the dad bod, if you will,
Hmm.
what our three daughters love to call man boobs, what I prefer to call gynecomastia more clinically. Um, and then, but you know, these characteristics of life are so normal, really,
Hmm.
but they're really abnormal. We've just normalized them. And then I had a friend who started a continuous glucose monitor company, and she got me to put this little disc on my
Yep.
triceps, and I'm wearing one now for those people that can see it. And yeah, this little disc, you know, measures your blood glucose moment to moment, and it bounces that data kind of through the interstitial fluid, bounces
Hmm.
that data to an app, and you can really monitor your blood sugar moment to moment. It was, you know, typically and historically only prescribed for diabetics, but more recently it's become more commercially available. And lo and behold, I looked into that app and I was on the very, very highest edge of the pre-diabetic spectrum and lowest end of the diabetic spectrum. And then, you know, finally went to my primary care physician and lo and behold, got a diagnosis. And that, you know, was a really startling slap in the face. You know, here I was, someone that was, you know, very um, you know, entrenched in the wellness industry, but found myself extremely unwell.
Mm.
And primarily due just to being like, you know, overworked and stressed out. This is the period of which I call wealth and hellness instead of health and wellness. And, you know, that really propelled me on a kind of two parallel inquests to figure out like why I had gotten so sick, but really just me as a proxy for the rest of the world. You know, why are we so sick? Why are 60% of us laden with a chronic disease? Why are 93% of Americans metabolically dysfunctional in some facet? So, you know, I went off and interviewed 500 or 600 doctors, primarily integrative or functional medicine doctors, and then plenty of mystics and sages and kooky folks of kind of myriad faiths and beliefs, and then just jumped into my own petri dish and did a lot of me search and kind of through distilling that process and applying a lot of new funky weird ass protocols on myself. I had
Hmm.
a transformational experience and then and wrote a book about it um, that you know tries to impart a lot of knowledge, but also in a way that is based in story and a little bit of humor.
Mm. So let's dig into some of the protocols. I mean, there are so many protocols, and it's so hard, I find these days, for the average person to sift and sort, because there's so much commercial intent behind all of these, and so
Jeff
much of the
Jeff calls it sifting through the grifting, which I
yeah,
quite
yes,
like.
yeah, I love that because you are, and for the average person, it's really difficult. Um, and to even just with well-known people sorting through the commercial biases that exist because who's endorsing what, who's getting paid by who, how do you navigate that, and what are some of, if you're going to say, okay, here's like, give us a couple of the big hitting protocols that made a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just try to address the first question
Yeah.
first, and then I'll talk about the protocols. I mean, I tend to focus on the things that are very old and true and generally free
Hmm.
because it's these protocols that really defined our evolutionary history over hundreds of thousands of years as Homo sapiens. And you can really answer, I would say, 95% of your questions about your behavioral choices through the lens of how did I evolve?
Hmm.
And so if you superimpose that lens, let's just say on exercise for a moment. Well, how did we evolve in relation to exercise? Well, we walked 7 to 10 miles a day,
Hmm.
primarily for the purposes of hunting and foraging. That's now 14,000 to 20,000 steps for people counting on one of your myriad devices, right? This is
Yeah.
also known as zone two exercise. Um, you know, getting your heart rate up to 60% of maximum. And what else did we do? We built structures, we carried firewood. Of course, now, we call that resistance training, but we're really
Hmm.
just evolved lifting heavy things a few times a week. What else did we do? Well, generally against our will, we were compelled into a full sprint, being, chased by an ungulate or a tiger or something. Now we call that high intensive interval training, right? So our zone five training, where you're getting your heart rate up to 90%, maybe we do that one time a week. Um, and then, the other thing about, modernity, certainly within the capitalist structure, is that, we've commodified and productized the concept of exercise, such that for many of us, it exists in this little 45-minute fluorescent blob at the bottom of our Google Calendar, somewhere between 5:30 and 6:15,
Hmm.
where, we hop on the elliptical to expiate our sins. Um, and that was certainly the way I exercised for many, many years. I call it chronic cardio, and it just patently doesn't work. And the proof for that is that, since the early 70s, we've developed 45,000 gyms in the United States, 45,000 places to grunt and sweat, and yet obesity rates have tripled in that same time period. So it's really not for the lack of gyms that we
Mm.
find ourselves to be in a sort of precarious physiological condition. It's really that we have taken exercise and we've commodified it, primarily just like if you think of like how we evolved on the plains of the Serengeti, we were just moving all day.
Yeah.
Movement was an integrated part of our life. It wasn't something that we did for 45 minutes at the end of the day. And so that was, and now, of course, we have an acronym for that too. It's called non-exercise activity thermogenesis, NEAT.
Hmm.
Um, but because we need to have an acronym for everything. Um, but that's a very easy way to answer that question, like how should I exercise? You really study, how did I evolve in relationship to my environment? And then you come up with those very simple things, walk a lot, lift some heavy things, get your heart rate up to maximum a couple of times a week, but really integrate movement throughout your entire day. No hour long conference calls back to back to back to back to back, make them 45 minutes or 50 minutes, and then, do some push-ups or some pull-ups or,
Hmm.
walk around the block a few times. And that's a really good way to think about protocols in general.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. We tend to overcomplicate things. Well, I mean, we're also being sold the latest gadgets and yeah, it's hard to monetize, get up and walk around the
Yeah.
block. It's hard to monetize push-ups.
Totally. Well, and I'm into like, yeah, like I have gadgets.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I monkey around with all sorts of different supplements and different things. And I think those are interesting, but
Hmm.
I would categorize those as the final 1 or 2% of optimization. And the other 98% are very, very basic. But we have to habit stack to do them. And I think that's the key.
Mm. So one of the things I didn't hear you mention there, we just focused pretty heavily on exercise, and I mean, I think a lot of people saw the probably the Peter Thiel on 60 Minutes a few weeks ago, and I mean,
Hmm.
he pushes everybody towards exercise, and this is the problem. I think I have with the whole longevity is everybody says, oh, it's exercise. Oh, it's diet. Oh, it's this. But it's a bit of everything, right? From my perspective, let's talk about diet and nutrition. Where does that fit in?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to monopolize all of the talking. So, Schuyler,
Yeah,
if you want to
throw
take
into
it.
both.
I mean, I'll pipe in because I also would like to just touch back really briefly on the gadgets bit.
Yeah.
But it ties into certainly ties into nutrition.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, there's the classic saying is you vote with your fork, you know, 3 to 10 times a day, depending on how much you're snacking. Um, but I mean, to me, there is no question that the primary thing we do for our health is what we put in our body through primarily food and then perhaps through some supplementation or medication, if, depending on your health condition. But I'm a way bigger believer in a really solid whole foods diet
Hmm.
than in any of the expensive things that are being sold to us constantly for longevity.
Hmm.
Um, and you know, eating again, going back to what Jeff said, eating the way human beings as an animal ate for hundreds of thousands of years, if not the last 10,000 years, is going to heal many of the problems that we face, especially as we age. But uh, I am not a gadget person. I never put on a Whoop or an Oura Ring until a few years ago. And I think that, an obsession with metrics is its own kind of unhealthy rabbit hole. But I do think using various devices, a Whoop or an Oura Ring, or as Jeff did, and I think really potently, sometimes putting on a continuous glucose monitor if you have any worries about your ability to process sugar, um, is really powerful. And like as a woman, it never occurred to me that I might postmenopausally develop some insulin resistance. And I've never had problems with my blood sugar. I've always been pretty healthy. I've always eaten really healthy. And then it wasn't until fairly recently that I noticed that I did start to develop a little bit of insulin resistance. And then that getting that metric
Hmm.
from blood panels, but also from a CGM, made me ask why. And then I learned that because postmenopausally our estrogen drops, and then lowered estrogen leads to continuously bad glucose control. This has a bad feedback loop with weight gain
Hmm.
and sleep disruption and stress. So I don't think I ever would have gone down that journey if I hadn't had a device tell me that I was in a little bit of trouble. So that's I think
Yeah.
there's a healthy middle path there, but I do think these metrics in used judiciously can be really, really helpful and like, potentially a lifesaver.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what you can measure, you can improve, and I think that is useful. I mean, to your point about nutrition, I mean, yeah, movement and nutrition and sleep essentially operate within a mutually interdependent matrix.
Hmm.
You really can't separate them. But again, if you really look through that lens of evolution, we were opportunistic omnivores. We ate 800 different kinds of plants and seeds and tubers, and if we were really lucky, some regeneratively raised, lean wild game, right? That was a
Hmm.
heavy, a big protein bolus.
Hmm.
And so if you really examine, you pull that apart, that's primarily fiber, phytonutrients, and healthy protein, healthy lean protein.
Hmm.
And what you don't find in that equation is a tremendous amount of carbs, right? And so I'm not anti-carbs per se, but certainly I'm anti sort of refined,
Yeah.
ultra processed carbohydrates. And that's what we're, mostly getting served up in modern society, generally driven by economics, because those are the foods that are the cheapest to make, that yield the highest margins for, big food, et cetera.
Hmm.
So it's really going back and, can I eat a variety of foods? Grandma often said, like, eat the rainbow, right? So can you shoot to eating 30 different kinds of vegetables per week? Can you shoot to getting, enough protein every day that doesn't have to be necessarily a gram per, pound of body weight, but maybe, zero point 0.7, zero point 0.8 grams per pound of body weight? I think these are good goals to shoot for.
Hmm.
I also see what you eat in relationship to when you eat and when you don't eat. Again, on the savannah of East Africa, we weren't able to DoorDash up any kind of food anytime we wanted, any time of year, right? So we were forced to endure some degree of calorie scarcity at the right times. So like Derek's loincloth might get a little tight in the fall, and like there would be no judgment on Instagram. That was actually totally adaptive, because it's adaptive for Derek to be a little fat, but not all the time, because
Hmm.
all fat is, though we tend to villainize it kind of in modern society for cultural reasons, but all it is warehoused energy. That's all it is. It's stored energy for a rainy day. But now we essentially live in a society where winter never comes, right? So
Hmm.
we're just constantly storing fat for a rainy day, but it never rains. And
Hmm.
so this, of course, I'm sort of alluding slowly to the concept of fasting, or some sort of self-imposed, time restricted eating, because again, this is how, how we evolved. And there are many different kinds of fasting. Some are more draconian than others. There's one meal a day, and every other day, and water fasts, and multi-day fasts, etc. I think that the for most of us, I think, when we're honest with ourselves and take an inventory, we're just eating from the moment that we get up until the moment that we go to sleep. And really what this, disrupts is a healthy hormonal balance, in the body. Your
Hmm.
your dutiful pancreas is forced to produce insulin kind of all day long, and you never move into repair or restoration mode.
Hmm.
So, this is what I think about nutrition is, really focus on healthy vegetables, a lot of fiber, a lot of protein, and then, create some sort of time restricted window where you can consolidate your consumption of food. That doesn't necessarily have to be an 8 hour window.
Hmm.
That's where a lot of the data is, but it could be a 10-hour window, or certainly a 12-hour window,
Hmm.
to allow your body to move into repair mode. And, there's all these terms that some people are familiar with: autophagy, the cleanup of senescent cells, or moving into ketosis, where your body is, burning fats instead of glucose for energy, et cetera, or mitobiogenesis, the creation of new mitochondria. All of that kind of requires different windows of fasting. But I
Hmm.
think, again, we're sort of living in this society that has been engineered at every turn for convenience and comfort and ease, and that we need to self-impose a little bit of Paleolithic stress from time to time in order to realign the way that we actually live
Hmm.
with with the way that we're actually engineered.
Hmm. Hmm. So here's a rabbit hole that we could head down. And Lori posted a comment there, on historically, there's a little research done on women. Women are not small men. And so I'd love to actually explore, because as you get into the longevity space, there has been a lot of focus on men. I think, there's more focus on women. Like I follow Stacey Sim and some of the stuff she's talking about. But I'd be curious, because I know we've got a mix here for people in midlife, particularly women, menopause, postmenopause. Where do we differentiate between genders, and what works for women, what works for men? Because I know there's certain things that my wife and I are like, oh, look, this works for me, this doesn't work for her now. And that might not have been the case 10 years ago.
Well, let's first acknowledge, as you pointed to, that if with many things it's hard to say because the research on
Yeah.
women in most areas is really lacking,
Hmm.
and there is a course correction there, driven in large part by women's interest and our buying power.
Yeah.
So, I am hopeful that this is changing in all parts of medicine. I mean, maybe even more importantly in cardiovascular research and other places where women have been woefully served in our medical system, but also in longevity and biohacking science. Um, but there are some really smart, amazing women primarily out there who are doing. There's a great book by Mindy Pels called "Fast Like a Girl." That's Mindy Pels, right, Jeff? Yeah.
Mhm.
So if you are interested in, I'm not much of a faster, to be honest. But if you are someone who's interested in tinkering with fasting, I do think that I think it makes a ton of sense. And having watched Jeff's health transformation that was largely driven by fasting,
Hmm.
and I'd love to have him talk a little bit about the psychological benefits of fasting too, because I think that is really powerful for men and women. Um, but Mindy's books and podcasts are great for women who are interested in how the differential between men and women in fasting protocol, because it is different, and then it's very different for women who are still cycling and women who are postmenopausal.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, we could also talk a little bit about
Yeah.
cold because
Yeah, I think
research, hold on, I'll just finish that. Research does say that I love this one, that women are not supposed to get into such cold water for effective cold therapy, and that makes me very happy because I'm not a big fan of the cold. But
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
anyway,
That's a perfect one, though. I mean, that's an interesting one. I have a cold plunge in my basement, and my wife just put a thumbs up there because her and I fight about this. I turn it down, and it's too cold. She doesn't need the same cold to get the physiological benefits.
benefits, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff, maybe you can speak a
the,
little bit more to that. I think it's a really salient point.
yeah, I mean, first of all, cold is very subjective.
Yeah.
So benefits can be conferred really at any temperature, provided that it just actually feels a little bit cold. So, there's no valor moral trophy to get into a 34-degree ice bath. In fact, I would never recommend anyone do that, particularly if you don't have, plunging experience. You can get
Hmm.
into a 58-degree ice bath and it can have tremendous benefit provided that it actually just feels a little bit cold. And there's a whole kind of it's the benefits are pleiotropic. I think in terms of gender differences as it pertains to cold, there are a number of things. Women tend to hold more body temperature, kind of in and around their reproductive organs, and so this is just more anecdotal reporting for me, but I've had a lot of people, I've cold plunged with a lot of people, and women, tend to tell me that they get colder like in their hands and feet. And that makes total sense because, if your core body temperature or your body temperature is more clustered kind of around your reproductive organs, you're going to have less volume per surface area on your hands and feet, and you have a lot of nerve endings there. So you're going to feel a tremendous amount of cold there. So that makes sense. I've certainly talked to a lot of female doctors about this topic. Many doctors, and this pertains to fasting too, say that cold and fasting and more of these stress protocols are more recommended during the follicular phase for women who are cycling and less in the luteal phase. Although again, this is very bio-individual for people. And then for women that are menopausal, I think that and postmenopause, I think that these protocols can be really effective, but I also think that there is no single rule. I think again that people should, if they're interested, experiment with these and just find the very edge of your discomfort, just the very edge. Um, and there's always opportunity to titrate. There's always opportunity to do a longer cold plunge or a colder cold plunge, et cetera. I just think that that, again, there's no points for extreme. I think, again, this is just about finding the edge of discomfort. So that's what I would say about that. I do think that, Schuyler alluded to the kind of psychological benefits to some of these practices. And I do think that these are highly applicable, irrespective of gender.
Yeah.
You know, like for example, for fasting for me, just because I consolidated my consumption of food between 10 and 6, more or less, when I was fundamental about it, it didn't mean that I didn't get hungry at 9 p.m. I still got those pangs of hunger. But, because I had become a disciple, if you will, of that practice, I didn't just mindlessly wander over to the larder and grab
Mm,
a bag of chips. I was actually forced in some ways to witness the nature of the hunger itself and ask
mm,
myself, is this hunger a biological need, or is it a psychological or emotional desire? And every single time it was the latter. It was always an emotional desire. Someone had insulted me on Instagram, or I was bored, or something wasn't going well at work, or it was never really a biological need. There's plenty of warehoused energy here on this body to last me a good month. So, in doing that, it really armed me with a very powerful tool.
mhm,
Viktor Frankl, the great author of, Man's Search for Meaning, famously wrote, between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space, there's a choice, and in that choice lies our freedom and liberation. And this practice of fasting gave me that space that became so useful in other areas of my life, because if I could make an adaptive choice within that space as it pertained to food, could I also not make it when there was that second glass of wine lingering there, or
mhm.
when some Amazon retail therapy like looked sumptuous, or did I really need to open up the Instagram app again? But even more kind of poignantly, was there not an opportunity for me to have more appropriate response to my children, when they were misbehaving or doing something inevitably annoying, and instead of having a knee-jerk reaction, have a more appropriate, thoughtful response. And this is where I find that many of these physiological practices, the most potent aspects of them are actually psychological.
Mm. As we talk through all the protocols and stuff, there's an element of discomfort that exists in pretty much all of them, really. When we think about the entire spectrum of health, we have to push to discomfort in some zone. Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. I mean, what I sometimes call the comfort trap, right? Is
Hmm.
that so much of chronic disease is actually the result of chronic ease.
Mm,
That really, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, but really accelerating in the last 50 to 70 years, our life at essentially every turn has been engineered for convenience, often driven by economics, but just the surfeit of always available ultra processed calorie dense food now, right? This
hmm.
is this is very antithetical to how we evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. And we didn't evolve in a vacuum. We evolved in relationship to our environment. And
Hmm.
so, just eating calorie dense foods 24/7, 365 days a year was just not how we evolved. And there's so many examples of this. I mean, we all love to, you know, binge Larry David, or maybe not everyone loves Larry David, but I do. Schuyler and I and our kids, we love watching Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Yeah.
It's super fun to binge that late into the night, right? But of course, we did not evolve to get that certain like sector of the electromagnetic wave spectrum that we know as blue light. We didn't evolve to
Hmm.
get blue light in the inferior part of our retina at night. We evolved to get it in the morning because we generally slept outside or in little minimal structures. We got outside and we looked at, at the as the sun was rising, and we got this blue light in the inferior part of our retina, and that kind of had this domino effect to set our circadian rhythm. So we would release melatonin, 14 hours later.
Hmm.
So, sometimes Schuyler and I joke that Larry David's an endocrine disruptor, but, he really, in this case, he is. And this is again a place where, culture has hijacked our biology.
Hmm.
And, we could try to pursue technological moonshots to change our biology, our underlying genetics, such that we could just thrive by eating Twinkies all day. Or that sounds like difficult. Or we could just, self-impose, as you say, a little bit of Paleolithic discomfort
Hmm.
to really realign the way that we live with our genetics. And, over time, it's not that hard, and and the benefits are just inestimable.
So if you say over time it's not that hard, why do people have so much difficulty embracing it?
Yeah, I think that because, the world conspires
Mm.
to make us so to take the easy option. So for
Yeah.
example, like we have these little devices, these
Yeah.
phones, right? Everyone likes social media and has a little fun with it, but social media is algorithmically designed to trigger you, right? To make you outraged or fearful. In fact, it's algorithmically preferenced for content that is hyperbolized, that, tickles your negativity bias, or, throws you up, unattainable visions of beauty that make you feel less than. And then,
Hmm.
in order to assuage that feeling of deficiency or that anger, there's like a little dopamine spritz just sitting there in your refrigerator, always available to
Mm.
you to provide a tiny bit of ephemeral relief,
Hmm.
via a donut, or a pint of Ben and Jerry's. And this is, where we find ourselves is like, I mean, and I'm guilty of this. I don't want to escape this, but we are emotionally dysregulated population. Not just for social media or 24-hour news, but like also financial hardship and racism and neglect and
Hmm.
you know, a myriad of reasons. And there's so many ways to address those feelings of deficiency or pain or comparison.
Mm.
And so this is why I think it's really, really hard. And you need to build a series of tools in order to properly manage that emotional dysregulation first, and then
Hmm.
be able to stack slowly in other protocols that really align biology and lifestyle.
Yeah. And I like that you said stack slowly. I think as humans, I'm going to do it all tomorrow. And then I fall off the bandwagon and I'm done.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
and
upward spirals are available to people. We always think
totally.
about health as a downward spiral,
Yeah.
but upward spirals are totally available and
Mm.
as addictive in many ways.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Skylar.
I was going to say that habits are so powerful. I
Yeah.
mean, it's changing the way that we eat or the way that we move, or it doesn't happen just through willpower. It happens through developing new habits, and especially habits that have a positive feedback loop. I
Hmm.
mean, we crave sugar and, you know, croissant, not just because we're, used to eating them, but because the the bugs in our gut are begging for them because
Yeah.
they've been well fed for a very long time. And there are complicated reasons that we continue to do things that we know are unhealthy for us.
Mm.
But the positive feedback loops are also really powerful. And when I'll just speaking personally, I really love to have a glass of wine or a nice tequila drink every night, and it really disrupts my sleep. It's just bad for my sleep. And so
Mhm.
I spend a few nights not having a drink, and I have much better sleep, even though I will go have another glass of wine another night. The feeling better the next
Mm,
day, and not being up two or three or five times in the middle of the night is feels really amazing too. But you have to, you have to try, and you have to try more than once, and probably more like 50 or 100 times to start
mhm,
to rewire your patterning in order to actually make a change. And as Jeff said, the key thing, it's kind of like, it's sort of like the cold bath conversation, cold plunge conversation. If you're really virtuous and you get in the 48-degree cold plunge and you grit your teeth and you put on the timer and you stay for 2 minutes, and then you feel virtuous for doing it once, but you're probably not going to do it again,
yeah,
because it was
yeah,
so fucking awful that why would you do it again?
yeah.
But if you take your hot shower and then at the end of your hot shower, you just turn it down to cold, and then you're in a tolerable cold for
Mhm,
ideally 2 minutes, but at least 60 seconds, and you get out and you let yourself be cold, you'll get maybe it's not as many
mhm,
benefits, but you're going to get the benefits of cold therapy. It's the same thing with, you know, eating more virtuously.
mm,
You just like going on a juice cleanse for 3 days and then just going back to what you were doing before is not a good project. It's much better to start to incorporate more fiber and vegetables and some lacto
mhm,
fermented, some sauerkraut with one or two of your meals every day. And then, you start to feel good. And then you actually find you start to crave sauerkraut or
yeah,
whatever,
yeah,
those things might be. And it works, but it doesn't work overnight. And that's why it's time, it's habits, it's habit
yeah.
stacking, it's moderation.
Yeah, it was interesting. I can't remember what study this was, but I was reading it just a couple of weeks ago, and it was a study I think it was something to do with diet, and they positioned in one group it was a protocol, in the other group it was a lifestyle. And the
Mm.
retention of the lifestyle group was far greater
Mhm.
than the
Mm.
protocol group.
Mm.
Totally
Wow.
makes
Interesting.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So, okay, so I'm going to open it up to some questions in here in just a second, but we have you guys coming down for a workshop in Baja in the new year, which is really exciting. And so, when somebody's working with you, this is going to be one of our 5-day workshops in Baja, which is beautiful. Have you guys been to the Baja campus yet? Have you been there? You
We
have.
have.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, so
So
you know what it's
beautiful,
like. It's awesome.
magical.
Mhm.
And what a great place to focus on wellness. What's the week going to look like? What process, when you work with people, do you take them through?
Well, I mean,
Well,
well,
yeah,
the
I
beauty
yield.
the beauty of this retreat is that it's longer than most of our. We usually do long weekend retreats, so it's really
Mm,
exciting
mhm,
to have 6 days, 5 full days. So, what's especially for what Jeff and I are really interested in here, which is habit stacking and and living through like protocols that you can realistically bring into your own life. In maybe it's in a jigsaw puzzle way. Of course, you're never going to go home and live like you do for a week in Baja, but you do embody these principles for 5 full days, and there's little chance that you're not going to go home and want to recreate a certain
yeah.
number of these things in your own life. So that's really exciting. Um, but I would say, it's a combination of practice and learning.
Mhm,
I mean, I'm mostly responsible for leading the somatic practices there. I lead, yoga and breath work pretty
mhm,
simply, a little bit of meditation. And then Jeff lectures, and then we'll apply these principles to getting in the cold ocean sometimes. And
mhm,
um, so, mostly I think that opportunities like this to go away and like remember the things you already know and learn some things that you didn't know that you didn't know are are so important for setting your North Star
Hmm.
forward. And it's especially powerful, I think, in the new year. I'm not a big one for New Year's Eve resolutions,
Hmm.
but I do like that the rhythm of the turn of a new year. And I think it is a really good time to not look for a resolution, but resolutions to, enact
Yeah.
in your relationships with other people and then, primarily with yourself. So it's
Mm.
it's very well timed.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I would just say from my side, I definitely want to provide really practical takeaways for people to bring home. And yes, I do like to talk about protocols and mechanism and science and geeky stuff, but I don't try to be like too overwhelming with that. I find that mostly I want to be a storyteller, but also a story receiver,
Hmm.
and also kind of explore some of the relationship between mysticism and medicine, between the metaphysical and the physical. I think that there's a lot there that is really interesting to mine over a number of days. So yeah, I'm interested in hearing people's stories,
Hmm.
um, where they feel out of balance in their life, and then helping to find the right recipes to reify, the middle way, if you will,
Yeah.
balance. I really feel that balance is the signature of health. It's also it's very aligned with my fledgling Buddhism. And
Hmm.
the body has its own middle way. We call
Hmm.
it homeostasis in the body.
Hmm.
And the more homeostasis that we have, the healthier that we are. And that's just not just your physical body, but also your psychological body. We call that centeredness, that ability to kind of always move back, to the middle,
Hmm.
and really kind of exploring that idea. And then from that idea, really then kind of drilling into the different ways that we can instantiate that middle, that homeostasis in our life. And then, yeah, to bring that back into the daily grind. I mean, the idea, this idea of being able to come to Modern Elder Academy is, it's a peak experience,
Hmm.
right? And so then, and it's in some ways easy to be vibrant and vital and joyful on campus, but then, can you bring that back, into what my dad sometimes calls dull care, and make it a little less dull.
Hmm.
And that's my goal.
Mm. And so Amanda asked a question here, and this is a valid one. What's the difference between the retreat we're doing at MEA and your typical commune? Sounds like length for sure, but I'm sure you can extrapolate on that.
Well, you guys also have a really robust group of thought leaders and teachers there as well. And your programming, I mean, you have a whole curriculum which you add on to ours, which is really cool. So actually, maybe Derek, you could speak to that
Mm.
a little bit because I think it's pretty clear what Jeff and I are about.
Absolutely. And in terms of that and where we're going with MEA is how do we create real change and change beyond just coming to a workshop and taking notes. So, working with you. So we will work with Schuyler and Jeff to build out an entire week that builds a cohort driven model to wellness. And so weaving in their curriculum, their thought leadership in this space and also, just one thing I want to point out is when you come to an MEA retreat, which is so unique for what we do and for this length of time, it's a small cohort, right? So, I mean, if you do want to, geek out with Jeff on protocols and gadgets, he's there as well as Schuyler, and we can go deep into these, but um, it's weaving our MEA ethos into the wellness track that Jeff and Schuyler are bringing to us, and then creating a cohort. What I want to see, particularly with the cohorts we're doing this longevity work with, where there's accountability in the long term, where there's support in the long term. You've gone on this journey together with these 20, 25 people at MEA, and then that continues on your health journey. Because as we know, this is not a one and done. This is an ongoing process. So that would be my take on it for sure. And James, you've got a question. Did you want to unmute yourself there?
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted, right?
Yep, loud and clear.
You know, hi, I'm Jim Flaherty. You know, whether you're listening to Chip or Arthur Brooks or Dan Buettner or Mark Nepo talking about longevity, and they all talk about it, it also always comes down to, besides the importance of living the Blue Zone's life, of moving more and diet, which I certainly work on, is the rest of it is mindset. Because it is true, you are as old as you think. And unless you convince yourself that, as I say, as I've written many times, the band won't stop playing till you stop dancing, you know, you are going to get old. I know 45-year-olds and 50, and a lot of people in their 50s who are worried about aging, seriously worried about aging. And I look at them and think, what the hell's wrong with you? You know, that we're given an opportunity every day to see, hear, taste, touch, smell, share, love, embrace. I mean, that's the gift of life. I'm 90 years old, and I do not go to bed thinking, I wonder if I'm going to wake up on the right side of the grass tomorrow. I know I am, because I have things to do. I have purpose. If you went to a Richard Leider workshop, you know about purpose. But all of those things, I think having contacts, which is what they all talk about. If we go back to Dr. What's his name, Robert Waldinger, who wrote The Good Life, about the 90-year-old Harvard study of adult human behavior. It all comes back to how many contacts you have in your life determines how long you live. You know, so I'm a great believer in mindset and how you approach every day. Right.
James, you
Jim,
brought
just
that back to us. You came full circle back to community. I really appreciate that.
Thank
Jim,
you.
just an interesting asterisk there. So I know Bob Waldinger, I interviewed him, and what interesting thing that came out is that Schuyler's grandfather was in that initial study.
Oh,
and
wow.
so he was a sophomore at Harvard when
That's terrific.
that study began. And in his later years, we actually helped him, although Bob was not happy to hear this. We helped him fill out some of the paperwork but you're
He was in
absolutely
his
right.
90s.
He's
But
terrific. Waldinger is terrific.
yeah, and he's a Roshi, I believe, also. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that you know, the number one indicator for health and happiness over the long haul is the depth of your social connections. And I remember Bob saying that, you know, clear as day. And it is something that we all need to remember. I think the other thing that you put your thumb on is, you know, the importance of staying curious and maintaining this beginner's mind, that there's always something to learn. And this has been something that's been reignited for me in the last 5 or 6 years. There's not a day that I don't wake up that I realize how little I know, right? And then the more that you learn, it's like bringing a torch out into the night sky. The more blackness of the sky is revealed, right? And I think that this is a huge part of you know,
From James's fourth echo,
what
dot. Yes, Jim, dinner is ready.
Of dying old at a young age, right? You know, so is maintaining that level of curiosity and that desire to learn.
I also see it in the change of the cohorts that are coming to MEA, where MEA used to say the average age of the participants were in their late 40s. I see it aging more, as is the demographics. There are now more people in their 50s and 60s in the workshops, which I
Yeah.
find very interesting because people are living longer and they're also buying into the MEA point of view that age is such a point of view up here.
Yeah.
That if you really
Yeah.
get moving, that you don't grow old. You go on and you
Yeah.
can
Oh,
participate, you know.
yeah, one of the interesting things about learning is actually also creating a community of fallibility, where actually mistakes are not only acceptable but encouraged. We actually learn neurologically through mistake making. There's a whole sort of chemical cascade that happens around mistakes, which is
Right.
totally fascinating.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that, creating the safety and the trust of a container like MEA provides that opportunity for people to try new things without the inhibition, without the fear of making mistakes, and then being able then to, have that little dopamine burst when you finally like land on the right thing, and that is seemingly what cements new knowledge, new synaptic connections. And this is the fascinating kinds of things that we're learning now. And this is the kind of thing I love to talk about and share.
Great. Thank
Yeah,
you
and
both for thank you both very
James,
much.
you touched on how people in their 50s are often, beset with
Worried.
anxiety about
Yeah,
this
yeah.
stage. And it's so true. And I'm in my mid 50s, so I see it all around me. And I think that like sort of the 50 to early 50s to late 50s is often the hardest for people because it's the
Mm-hmm.
transition moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think one of the great things about making it through your mid 50s is you realize that you actually give less and less fucks. Pardon my French. But there's a wonderful
Mm-hmm.
liberating quality to making it through this like true realization that your youth is over. It's
Yeah,
over. And
right,
like
right.
all you
On
have
James's fourth echo,
is
dot. Mrs.
is
Okay.
Jim, dinner is ready.
you got to go eat your dinner, James.
Yeah, I 2 meals a day to follow your diet, by the way.
That's
I
right.
do whole
You,
fruit in the
you need
morning.
to, we're continuing your fasting protocol for another 2 minutes. Um, yeah, I think that the places like MEA, especially where in community you like get together with a big group of people who are really excited
Right.
about being in this stage of life is so reinforcing. And most of the women I know, once they kind of get over that hurdle of like, oh yeah, my collagen is down and it's only going further down. Oh well. You
Yeah,
know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like,
yeah. No,
and
it's true.
all those wrinkles
Yeah.
that are collecting, those are the map of my experience. I mean,
Mhm.
once you really embrace that and you open yourself up to the fact that we are now in a stage of life where we can continue to learn, as Jeff said, and we're learning to learn. We're not learning to acquire and to dominate or to we're not on that treadmill. We're on a whole different rhythm
Mm,
of living, and I think it's really exciting.
mm,
I think it's
Thank,
absolutely.
really powerful.
well, thank you again. I'll do an MEA commercial. You'll live longer if you go to MEA workshops.
I'll do
That's
whatever
a
you're doing.
that's a great commercial. All right. Well, we're 4 minutes past the hour. So we're gonna call this one done. And that was fantastic. I could talk to you guys all day. I love talking about this. And you're both a wealth of knowledge. And I'm genuinely looking forward to seeing you guys in Baja. So thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who is here today.
Yeah, thanks all.
Yeah,
Appreciate you.
yeah.
All right.
What an
Many
amazing
friends.
community you've created.